It's a sunny day here in Ireland. I hope it's sunny everywhere else in the world. It's about the only bright thing that's happening around the world at this moment in time. I guess there's one thing you could say about the COVID-19 coronavirus is that it's probably the first time we've got the whole planet unified against a single enemy, which is a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
And isn't that would be a fair comment, Piers?
I think so, and I think also it's really showing where technology really can be a huge help. Like here we are working away and in different parts of the world, different parts of the city. So it really, I think it's the coming of age of virtual working, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's we've all had to get used to a new way of living, a new way of working. And indeed, actually, though, the interesting thing, we've had quite a number of conferences cancelled around the world. I'm sure many people have had conferences cancelled, and we've seen, and you wonder, we've had 5 in March alone that were cancelled. And looking at this type of activity we're doing now, and one that I did last week with another software asset management community, Sam's Nordic, which was supposed to be held in Copenhagen. They put it online, and it does show that maybe we don't need to do as much travel as we thought we needed to do. Piers, I'll kick things off. I see we've got people coming in, which is great. So welcome everybody. My name is Tomás O'Leary. I'm the CEO and founder of Origina. I'm delighted to be just the initial kind of presenter and producer of our webinar presenter, Piers McDonnell. And Piers is here to give us the title of the original webinar idea was IBM Audit Defense, Master the Art and Minimize the Impact. And it's fair to say, Piers, we've known each other for quite some time, 3 to 4 years at least. We've your ability to master the art is second to none in my experience. You've got over 20 years experience in the licensing world, and particularly around IBM. You're founder of License Talk, licensed consulting organization. You're chapter lead here in Ireland of the ITAM org organization. And as I said, we've worked together for a number of years, and I'm delighted that you're able to join us. So thank you.
And thank you for that.
Before I pass over to you to kick off the presentation, I just thought I just think this whole area is fascinating, really. The whole area of audit, it's been fascinating for a number of years. I guess, number one, because it's very complex. It does require a lot of brain power to get your head around this area. And one could argue it's deliberately complex, made by the mega software vendors. But it's also an area of huge risk for organizations. But I think in today's world, where we're looking at massive challenges with organizations under huge pressure, some of them would hopefully they'll avoid it, but could well go out of business, and many of them probably will. And even without that, companies are going to be under massive costs and savings pressure. The range of savings or costs increases in this area is absolutely enormous. I mean, we had one example. I remember a number of years ago, and we were at the early days of being involved in this area of audit. And one organization we came across, and we provided some advice at the time to the organization. They were based in the UK to get some audit defense expertise from the likes of Pierce. And this organization had a £500,000, which in reality is probably a small amount of money. But for them, it was a large sum of money, £500,000 exposure, and they were being pushed to pay. They introduced an audit defense expert at the time, and we were in the background following this, and it was really interesting that when the outcome was zero, they paid zero because they got the right advice at the right time. And 3 simple things that happened in the audit. One, the auditors and the vendor had not followed best practice, their own best practice. Number 2, the license agreement actually contradicted the audit findings when they got into the detail, which wasn't actually difficult to find. And actually, number 3, crucially, the measurement was faulty. So I think you can see this area is an enormous area of challenge, and we're going to see from today's webinar with Pierce some really strong advice, some tips from you, Pierce. I'm delighted to be able to do that. I think we have a poll to start with. If I can navigate the thing before we kick off and pass over to you, Pierce. We wouldn't ask the audience very interesting, be very helpful for Pierce to understand. Has anyone on this call? Are you concerned about being a target of an IBM audit, or have you in the last year been audited by IBM? This will be very interesting to see what people actually think. I suspect we'll get a mix here of answers. But if you wouldn't mind, everybody, just answering that question, they'll all be anonymous, obviously, and it'd just be curious to know where are people at with regards to audit at this point in time.
I think
great. I think we've got a couple.
It'll be a case.
So I show the results.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think the results should be showing there on the screen then. So there you go, Pierce. I'll pass it over to you.
Okay. I'm just going to rewind back a little bit. Just a little disclaimer at the front there. You can have a read of that, but essentially this is our opinions, and it's not legal advice, but it comes from many years of conducting many projects. So hi, my name is Pierce MacDonald, and I'm an IBM license expert. And today's webinar really it's going to be very simple. I'm just going to give you a quick introduction really around IBM agreements, and I guess why IBM can audit you in the first place, and what you've signed up for. I've picked off 10 audit tips. To be honest with you, there are many more of them, but I kind of went for the most easy ones, and we'll summarize them in terms of takeaways. And also we'll have a little bit of time at the end for a bit of Q&A. And so as throughout the presentation, I suggest just start raising your questions in the virtually there, and Lorna and Tomas will pick them up, and we'll hopefully cover them all at the end. So with that, we've done the poll already, so I'm looking forward to seeing the results on that one. The first thing to kind of look at, first of all, is IBM's rights here. When you signed up, whether you knew it or not, when you signed up your standard license agreement, attached to that is the IPLA, the International Program License Agreement. And this is this is actually one of several little documents that get attached to your master license agreement. And in there is a clause called compliance verification, clause 11. And it's got 2 paragraphs in it. One's to do with the verification process and one's to do with the resolution. So the first thing, I guess, to make sure you're clear on is you've agreed to this. There's no getting around it, really. What is interesting, though, is this document is actually digital. You'll see the URL there on the presentation. To be honest, all you got to do is type in IPLA into Google and you'll get the latest version of that. And you'll notice I use the word the latest. It's a living, changing document. And I know just from even from the last webinar that was here, there's a bit of contention around how enforceable these legal contracts are. But right now, that is a document online and you have signed up and have agreed to allow IBM audit you. So let's have a look and see what's actually inside in these 2 clauses. The first one, the verification process. And I've picked out the key bits you really need to know about here. What you've basically said is you have agreed to IBM, when you sign that contract, to keep accurate records. So what's important here is the onus is on you to keep the records. And that includes your entitlement, how you're tracking, how they're being used. So your problem. Also, IBM may verify the licensee's compliance. And they're saying that they have the rights to. So again, this wording, by the way, has changed slightly over the years. This is that dynamic document I mentioned. And it used to be it's been made more loose, so it strengthens IBM's audit capacity here. And third phrase in here of note is they can use independent advice or auditors. And practically speaking, it's nearly always going to be a third party, such as Deloitte, KPMG, sometimes other third parties, and they act on their behalf. And that is a typical scenario. You'll have, I guess, the good cop and the bad cop. The bad cop being the auditors coming in, making it very difficult for you and wanting all this information, and then later IBM coming to your rescue by trying to do a deal. So with that in mind, the resolution part then is the second paragraph here, 11.2. And the key points really here is IBM decide the excesses, not you. And if they find any, they can go back to 2 years or to the duration. That is a negotiable. That is a point that's negotiable. But right now, the letter of the law is 2 years. I have seen scenarios where they've tried to go back further. If I was defending that, I would be throwing that out immediately. And also, interestingly, also is the additional charges and other liabilities determined as a result of the verification. In other words, they can charge you for it. And they can also charge you for other things that they decide. So these are three important points within that you've signed up to when you signed that agreement. So with that said, I also want to just touch on subcapacity license rules here. And this again, you have indirectly signed up for this when within your agreement. If you wish to take advantage of subcapacity licenses, and this is most commonly used where you're using virtualized technology. First thing you have to do is you must have ILMT installed, and you must have it installed at least within 90 days of your first deployment of the product. The second thing you're saying is you're going to produce quarterly reports. Every quarter, you're going to run off an audit report from ILMT to demonstrate to them that you are managing and maintaining and that you're keeping count. And the last point is you will retain those records for 2 years. It's quite an important one because if you've received the audit letter and you suddenly decide to start running off those quarterly reports, they will expect you to have 2 years worth. So you'll need to be prepared for that argument. So that's kind of the foundations. And with that, I suppose let's dive into some of the audit tips here. Because the first thing is, we're just going to provide you with a sample of them. These are coming from essentially many, many projects that myself and the team have done around IBM licensing, be it ELA renewals, audit defenses, voluntary declarations. We are independent advisors, so some of the, I guess, advice in here would not be what you get strictly from an auditor or a business partner, and but that's okay because we're very much on your side. And of course, the team is made up of ex-auditors on board, so what you're seeing here is very much the poacher turned gamekeeper, or vice versa. So, the first thing, I guess what makes you a target? And it's important to understand this because based on our poll, some of you may not have received the audit yet, but that's not to say that you have now tripped over one of these that will cause you to be the target of an audit later. So the first one is, has there been a significant growth in your business? And the logic very simply here is if your business is growing, you're not buying more licenses, there's a disconnect as far as IBM are concerned, and rightly so. You're probably using more products, your teams are growing, and hence you may even have deployed it on greater and greater capacity hardware. So chances are you are under licensed. Second area is restructuring of the organization. And really what you're talking about here is divestitures, mergers, acquisitions, so forth. And there's a couple of reasons. One, the license agreements are very often have to be refreshed, maybe even be invalid. Also, it's very common for licenses to be shortfalls to occur in the restructuring. And if for nothing else, restructuring also brings with it large budgets, and all of your vendors, not only IBM, will be looking for a slice of that action. The third one is around IBM infrastructural changes. This is probably where I see the greatest compliance risks in most of my projects we do, where the business has decided to do a massive move from physical to virtual. Very common. Maybe moving of data centers, a digital refresh. Doesn't really matter what it is. You're making significant changes in your infrastructure. And because of the license metrics around IBM products, chances are you are creating a shortfall or you're creating risks. And of course, an auditor will know this. Drops in level of investment. This is going to be very pertinent in the current environment. I think already many of the audience here, your businesses, will be taking a serious look at the technologies they're using, and we'll be looking to see if we can find some savings. Where previously there might have been just a default renewal of S&S without looking twice, there will be a serious look now, because do we actually need to make that investment because of the cuts across the business? Again, because of the environment we're in, cancellation of large projects. I imagine that many of you now are going to be working optional projects, or projects that haven't already started are being put on hold. You've got to keep in mind here that that's a sale that's been projected and predicted as far as IBM is concerned, and your account manager is potentially going to miss their target. And another way to make up that shortfall is essentially to nudge the project, or to make up the money through a review. Not have an ILMT deployed. Basically, there are very limited circumstances under which you would not be running ILMT. And if you don't have it, it basically indicates that you probably are not managing your IBM investment more correctly, and chances are you're under licensed. And of course, the last couple are very much around, has there been a change in an account manager? New face, new person, and they'll be looking to grow their number and looking at old accounts that haven't been, I guess, looked at in the past. And license reviews are a very easy way of doing that. The last two, of course, then are around end of an ELA. If you don't renew one, a very common target. And if there's certain products, high-risk products within your estate, particularly the older ones on older metrics, if you've gotten there, it's a license review or an audit is a very nice way of nudging you off those old metrics and moving you to a new one. And the final one, of course, is if they just haven't done a review or a license audit in the last 3 years, chances are you're very high on the risk. Unless you're doing substantial investment year on year, you can pretty much expect a letter in the post. So that gives you a sense of what makes you a target. And let's see what happens when you actually get the letter then. Well, the first thing I would say is when that letter arrives in, chances are to be to one of the senior management, a CFO or head of procurement, and then it gets passed down the line. Ultimately and very quickly, you'll want to establish who is the single point of contact. And this is very much negotiation leverage, but it's also to help you manage the information flow in and out of the business. There will be requests from IBM's auditors, and you want to make sure they're managed to one point, so we know what they're looking for. We can manage those requests, and also you can route them to the right place. You do not want technical teams answering or being interviewed by an auditor directly without supervision. Also, there's going to be information flowing out. That single point of contact wants to make sure that everything is scrutinized and checked, that what's going out is indeed okay, and that we're happy with that. Senior managers are going to have questions. An audit is typically $1 million risk and above. They're not undertaken unless there's a significant expectation of revenue from IBM. It's just not worth it. So they will, given the size of the risk here, there will be high interest. And ultimately, that single point of contact will be interfacing all the different teams. You're going to have to be interfacing with legal, procurement, infrastructure, the SAM team, to name but a few. And you want to have that coordinating activity done through a single point. So with that in play, next one is you can actually stop these in their tracks. And the most common techniques for doing this right now is, might seem obvious, but a call to the account manager. Sometimes there can be misunderstandings, particularly if you're in an organization that has got multiple regions where your primary purchases have been done out of the US, but the audit's been kicked off in the UK, or vice versa. So sometimes the account manager can do something about it. They can maybe reduce the scope for you, or eliminate it, or postpone it. Next one is offer them a bigger deal. If you're about to kick off a large project or in the middle of one, you can say, look, this audit is going to slow down this opportunity, and that they're essentially removing themselves from the mix. And that can be a very compelling reason for an audit to disappear, or at least get postponed for a significant amount of time. Head office leverage is also a good one to call in, particularly if to the global operation. And they in turn can use their larger buying power to essentially make the audit go away. You can also look for it to lower the impact and get a self-declaration. And this is basically where the audit, they don't go through the full process. They allow you to prepare the numbers and submit the spreadsheet, and they'll take it they'll trust you on it. And this can generally significantly reduce the disruption to your business. And also, it actually makes it a much faster process for everybody involved. So it's a very viable solution to maybe downgrade from a full audit. It's also worth looking to see if you've got audit protection clauses. Not common in your standard agreements, but if you have a very, very large purchase, a very, very large ELA, or maybe you've negotiated protection around certain technology stacks. So, for example, your system software, such as your operating systems and hardware, you may have protection clauses in there that essentially means that you're protected for a period of time, or those products are out of scope in an audit. And then just looking to see, have they the rights to all of those particular products? This can be very often the case for newly acquired products, or you may have had specific exclusions in there. The most common trigger for that is you've been audited in less than 12 months, and it's basically seen as an unfair business practice. So have a look to see if you can actually stop it before it even starts, or at the very least, downgrade the impact. Moving on, delaying. You're going to need time to prepare, and you want to take control of the cadence of an audit. And this means slowing down the auditor in any way you can. Now, by default, you do not have to reply to the auditor for essentially 30 days. But even with that in mind, you don't have to follow their schedule. They will certainly try and impose one on you. They'll be sending you forward schedules, spreadsheets, booking meetings, and so forth. You must take control back of that, is the first thing I would say with regard to timing. Other techniques that you may wish to use to delay things is asking them to sign your NDA. Very often there'll be an argument put forward that the NDA in place is adequate. We have one already. But you can quite legitimately may not be happy with it, but it's also a very good way of slowing things down a bit. You can also cite the disruption to your business. This used to be more difficult in the past, but given the current environment we're in, it's actually it would be the default step I would go to. Right now, you could easily request 3, 6, even 9 months of a postponement, given just the sheer impact of COVID-19 and what's happening right now. That aside, you can also, other requests can be for them to prepare an entitlement position for you. They may push back, but it takes time, and you're quite entitled to request that. Final technique might be just an outright rejection of the auditor being proposed because of conflict of interest. It's kind of the nuclear option, but if you need the time, I've seen this technique used, and actually I saw one client who had a very, very large audit and needed the time, rejected 2 out of the 3 auditors being proposed and bought themselves 12 months. So buying yourself time to just prepare. You do not want to be rushing into this. Next one, kind of obvious, but you need to get help. This is not a core part of your business, license management and defending audits. So whether you come to someone like us or whoever, first of all, you need someone to guide you through this process. It's not something you're used to doing, and having an expert who's done it before will help. You'll need help preparing your position and basically presenting it in the most positive way possible. The information you're sending and exchanging will need to be sanitized. You need to know what's going on. Very often, the output from some of these tools or logs is not easily understood. Some of the requests being made are, you're not quite sure what you're releasing. So you're going to need to phone a friend here and get some help. And also, throughout the process as well, getting expert advice. They'll provide you with the arguments to defend and suggested options, not just the default ones that are presented by IBM, on how to close compliance gaps. Ultimately, you're going to need help here for the duration of this project and possibly beyond. Next one, which is you're going to want to find out quickly how bad the situation is and carry out an initial risk assessment. And really, it's important to understand here, you're not trying to figure out the exact details. You're just trying to get a rough order of the magnitude. Roughly how serious is this? Where are the big gaps? Are there any quick fixes we can do? Are there any systems that have been inadvertently left on? Projects that should have had their old software removed, or so forth? Ultimately, though, the real value of having a quicker initial risk assessment, and I do mean quick, as in a couple of weeks to come to a number, is that you'll also be able to establish the business case. You'll be able to give management an idea of how big and how much they should be budgeting for in terms of the expected cost, but also the business case for making changes to remove problems that are discovered and to ultimately stand up a project to make changes. You'll need the business case, and you need to base it on some facts, not just on some guesses. So that's why the initial risk assessment is so helpful. Limiting the scope. When an audit letter arrives in, the wording's fairly loose, and it says basically all products. But that's just the opening, I guess, bid. You need to be limiting the scope here and negotiating your pretty much on all points. You first of all need to be agreeing your statement of work. I'd be strongly recommending that you define and list the products, and this should be directly related to your entitlement for Passport Advantage. You'll also need to be doing things like defining the methods of data collection in advance. You ultimately want to avoid the fishing expedition that can occur, particularly if an audit is not turning up quick wins for the auditing team early on. They'll keep digging until they find something, and you want to limit that, and you want to let them know that. You also may want to set time constraints and define the schedule that suits you, not the one that's been enforced upon you by the client. Ultimately, you want to be limiting the scope, and this ties into a point later on about negotiations. Also, the communication protocol, how meetings will be done, how calls will be carried out, how communication will not be done. The most important point here would be saying that they will not be communicating with senior management without direct approval. Information will not be released to IBM without written authority from you. Simple things like that can dramatically improve your negotiating position as well as the final result. Understanding the evidence, and I choose this word intentionally. This is evidence you're providing, and this is not a technical exercise really. It is more of a business exercise and more like in a court of law. The information you're providing is going to be analysed. You need to understand what you're sharing, what's in there, why they're asking it. You should only be sending what's been requested, and be very careful about oversharing. Providing the most common example here would be running tools and scripts across the estate and really sending the whole lot. This is something you should not be doing. You need to be very careful about the information you're sharing. And it's also okay to reject a request. Just because they asked, they have a default list, the auditors. They're trying to do a job, and they will try and get all sources they can to help them do it. That does not necessarily mean you have to give it to them. You provide the information, answer questions, but be very careful always about the detail you're providing, because there may be clues within that will open you up for further scrutiny and risks later on. And also, do not allow scripts to be run in your estate ever. I know there'll be various arguments which say, well, we can test them, have they been approved? The short answer is, scripts are never a good thing to run in your estate. Aside from the security risk and the disruption and just the effort of your team, scripts go much, much deeper than you realize. The information is quite difficult to sift out and to see what's actually been revealed. And ultimately, there's information in there that should not be released to anybody. Mistakes are common. This kind of gets back to a point that Tomas made earlier on, and he was talking about how the audit went from $500,000 to a zero settlement by virtue of a number of mistakes being pointed out. I have yet to do a review or an audit where there haven't been mistakes. It's just a case of where are they and how bad are they. The classic spreadsheet calculations, and it is still spreadsheets that are being used, very common, where sums, calculations, cut and paste errors occur constantly. Ultimately also though, there's assumptions being made in there about how numbers are arrived at. The calculations, how the figures are worked out, on what assumptions were those assessments being made. And very often that detail is not there. And when you dig into it, you suddenly realize there's some very wide scope or blanket assumptions being made, or straight out mistakes in terms of the interpretation of the license rules. So again, an area mistakes are very, very common. You can scrutinize these numbers just from a straight calculation point of view, but also from the licensing rules point of view. The auditor is not infallible. Very often they have one senior, very experienced person and a number of junior, less experienced people who will make mistakes. And we find them every time. And also I talk about the non-PVU calculations. The reason that these are so fraught with problems is that they're interpretive, they're very subjective. Whether a simple example would be, is a user or not, an authorized user? Are they an employee? What the cutoff point is, and so forth. These are very subjective measures and can be open to mistakes. So assume mistakes, look for them, and they do become a negotiation leverage later. Everything's a negotiation. Literally from the minute you receive that letter, you need to be thinking about this as a negotiation. An audit is not really trying to enforce IP protection. It is a sales negotiation. It is trying to find reasons for you to spend money with IBM. It is that simple. And I should also probably point out is you should be preparing to spend money. Do not expect an audit to go away with a zero spend here. It could be net new products. It could be voluntary. It could be things you were thinking about buying, but you definitely want to throw a bone to this dog or you'll have great difficulty in closing it. The kind of things you need to be negotiating about here are going to be things like scope, what's in, what's out, the jurisdiction, the geographics, the products. Is it PVU, non-PVU products, and so forth. Then you also have to look at the schedule. Just because they ask for it next week does not mean that you're ready to start it. It's a negotiation. And the auditors expect this. But you should also need to be entering this friendly. They're trying to do their job here. So you need to negotiate and don't be stonewalling too much. Yes, be looking for your time, but it's a negotiation as well, and you need to be respectful of that. What's inside in your NDAs and any other documents that are being signed or exchanged. The products and scope we already mentioned, but these are negotiations. How they request data, what they're requesting. It's all a negotiation. At every stage, at every movement as you move along, right through to the final commercial resolution with IBM, it's a negotiation. And keep that in mind. And the final one, I guess, is it's okay to say no, to disagree with your auditor. This could be in terms of the schedule. It could be in terms of their results. They might say the number is this. You might say it's something else. You may not agree with their interpretation. Chances are, if you're working with someone like me, I will have a whole list of things you will disagree with them because we don't want to continue the negotiations. The important thing to understand here is that do not let the auditor sign off on the report that they're sending to IBM without your disagreements formally logged. Just because they say you're under by a certain amount does not mean you have to agree with it. And also, if they make certain assumptions, you may say, we may not agree with it. We may close off the audit piece, but we do not concede that we have to pay for this. Because guess what? There is another negotiation, another new game that you will be entering as soon as the audit is over and you start to have that commercial conversation with IBM. So with that said, the key takeaways really from this, you'll need time. So look for those delays, whatever way is necessary. Understand your risk early so that you know the values and that you can also take action because there may be some quick wins you can do to quickly reduce the problems. Ultimately, you also need to give early warning to your team so they can manage the project and remove some of these problems. Mistakes are common in the reports, common in the spreadsheets, common in the data that you're even providing them. So keep that in mind at all times. You negotiate on everything, right from when you take the first call to the day you sign off and the time you do the deal with IBM. And also at the very end of this, get independent advice. It's a short project, but just like if you're up in court, you'd bring along advice. Treat it this way also. In an audit, you want to make sure you have the best advice available to you. And with that, I guess I'll be handing this over to for questions. I don't know if I've got... So my name is Pierce MacDonald. IBM License Expert. You can see my email and you can get other tips on the blog. And I'm going to hand this over now to Tomas. Have we any questions in?
Pierce, yeah, thank you very much. Actually, that was fascinating. I loved your 10 tips. I think they're very practical. Really, I think we'll all gain a lot from those, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been in this game for 8 or 9 years now, and not as long as you, but, you know, even when you see them laid out that way, you go, yeah, I've seen that before, but you forget And in the heat of the battle, I'd imagine many organizations would. I had a little bit of butterfingers earlier. Pierce, apologies on the poll. The lack of normally I have help. Those of you who know me will probably be aware of how technically inept I sometimes am. So I didn't have my normal assistants to help me with the technology. So I think I clicked off the poll before I got a chance to show you the results. I don't think I can show them again on the screen, but I did take a quick note of them there. What was interesting about the results, and I'll throw this back over to you, Pierce, very briefly, just maybe comment on them because you didn't get a chance earlier. We had, to the poll results, it asked, who has been a target or feels there will be a target, and 60% either felt they were either had recently been audited in the last year or felt they would be audited, which is, and with only 40% saying they didn't, either weren't or didn't feel they would be an audit. That's an interesting observation, isn't it? Like almost 2/3 of people out there feeling either they are being audited or will be audited or have just been audited in the last 12 months. That's quite significant, isn't it?
It is quite significant, but to be honest with you, it's about what I would expect. Just from our experience here, as I said, to do the simple maths on it, if you've got agreements in place and you're looking at a 3-year frame before you're probably going to be getting a visit from IBM, those numbers will be about right. And also, given there's a high amount, like the audit risks that I mentioned, they're very much the triggers, and they're very common. And most large organizations have been going through major transformation, digital transformation projects, and moving from P2V and so forth. So it's exactly as I would expect it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. So we actually great. We have some questions that have come through on the list here, and I'll just call them out to you, Piers. The first one on it is what's the shortest period of time that you're aware of that an audit has happened, and what's the longest one? How long? I guess how long. Is that asking how long is a piece of string? How long or how short can an audit take?
I've seen an audit settled in a month, and let me probably answer it indirectly. How much do you want to spend, and how long are you willing to wait? If you're willing to basically pay exactly what the auditor says you owe them, you can settle it in a week. Just issue the PO, job is done. And there may be scenarios where that is indeed done, and where I see that very commonly done is where net new product is bought, where they came in, saw the gap, it was a self-declaration, and they said, yeah, we got us, we're short by whatever the product is, and they'll literally write the PO on the spot. The beauty of self-declarations, of course, is that you've got the discounting level, and it's just like all you're really saying to them is, thank you for warning us, we did check and we are short. The longest one I've seen is about 18 months, and it was for a very large pharmaceutical, and they were determined, first of all, the bill was multiple millions, and they felt that it was very unjust. And essentially what made the difference there is the CFO gave the support to the team to say, no, we are not just going to roll over and pay this. And through just very long, protracted negotiations, it eventually closed, but it was about 18 months in. So it's usually the close at the nearest financial period. A year end, you can always negotiate too. Everyone wants to do a deal at that stage, and very often that's a negotiating strategy I'd be recommending. If you're coming towards December, IBM's year end, and it might also be as an organization, your fiscal year end, very often deals get done in a rush there. So that'll be the most common one. That 6 months is about the norm.
Okay, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think the trigger, putting it on to a timeline that suits the publisher, in this case IBM, is probably a sensible one. I've heard that one before. That's great. Thank you. Another question here is, and this is obviously increasingly as here people go more public about the audit behaviour, and something you probably would never have heard 10 years ago. People are quite open, particularly at conferences. You hear it regularly. I'm sure you do the same, Piers. the pitfalls though? Are there any dangers of going public with audit behavior from IBM if you're not happy?
Well, the first thing is you probably have the NDA, the non-disclosure clauses in their agreement will stop that. So, and very often your own NDA will have something around that as well. So that's the first thing. Now, if you don't have if you don't have that in your NDA, it's hard to know. For the most part, you'll rarely, if ever, see any kind of. The only exceptions to that would be either government or defense in the US, where they're mandated, they have to reveal any settlements made. But for the most part, no. Are there any downsides? The short answer here is you have to. It's all about a negotiation. You'll hear me coming back to that all the time when it comes to audits. If there's leverage in it, maybe. But for the most part, what happens is conversations are had at conferences, at various CEO, CFO kind of events, and they share the intel. Gartner is also a very good spot where you'll see information shared. The reality is, the vendors know, and IBM in particular, there's no secrets here. This information is shared. So I don't know if there's particular value in going public. For the most part, you're prevented and probably not. Okay,
great. And we see another question actually very interesting. It's the around HCL buying and all of the other recent products that IBM offloaded last year. But the biggest one obviously was HCL last year. Are we starting to see the likes of HCL or those companies that have bought IBM software assets that were previously as part of the Passport Advantage program and now owned by organizations like HCL? Are we starting to see them? Are they pushing their audit rights now, or what are you seeing in the market?
Well, what we're seeing in the market right now is HCL are being very nice, and the reason for that is they've got product to push. They have anecdotally, and just from our experience, they've relaxed. They're not as intense with regard to the ILMT requirements around virtualization. But I should emphasize this was all pre the current crisis we're dealing in. And what's happened here is you're going to see significant contraction in IT budget right now. The projects I'm working on, where I was coming in, maybe doing right sizing, P2V type projects where they were measuring the license metrics. I'm literally getting the call saying, Pierce, come back in 3 months. That project is on hold. And what that means is that for vendors like IBM and HCL is they're going to see a huge contraction, not only in the S&S, but in new products bought. And the reality is, although nothing will happen probably for the next 6 months, you will see an increase in audits and as sales targets are being missed. In case of HCL, they've made a multi-billion-dollar investment. There's going to be pressure on to see recoup in that. And my expectation is that in 2021, we're going to see audit increases and we're going to see HCL being a lot less friendly.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I think I agree with you there. I'd say we'll see that. And back to the previous, someone else has asked a question here about litigation. These scenarios, these kind of, let's call them arguments over audits, which are happening more and more frequently, and kind of in the anger that's sometimes created. Are these starting to go litigious? If you've got a problematic audit, I mean, how much do IBM want to avoid this, or are they prepared to push it right to the wire?
They'll push it right to the wire. Have come across a couple of cases. It rarely, if ever, goes to court, and if it has, certainly I haven't experienced it. What does happen though is that, yes, it can get very heated. It can go legal, but for the most part, deals are done because what will then start to happen is the figures go up and up. And ultimately, most organizations, including IBM, want to do a deal and make the problem go away. What happens, though, the most common impact is just the length of time it takes and the resources on a company to defend it. And for the most part, everyone involved wants to do a sensible deal. It's just a case of at what price and how long. So it's rare, and it's never publicized, as I said, except the only exceptions being U.S. public sector, government, and defense.
Okay, good. Speaking of the law, actually, another question that's come in here is all these kind of unilateral changes we're seeing in terms of on the terms of agreements, and as you see on renewal dates, are actually IBM allowed? I mean, that's not just IBM, but we're talking about IBM. But are they actually, these publishers, are they actually allowed by law to do this?
A very good question. This one's been around for a few years, and I think
I know you're not a lawyer. I'm
not a lawyer, and I'm not going to pretend to be one on the internet either. Practically speaking, this comes right back to the click agreements that used to come with your software installs, and are you actually signing up? And a certain amount of tolerance was put in there, where things are very questionable. This one, I guess, Guy Triton previously in a webinar actually with Origina here made some really interesting points. Basically, this idea that you can have these dynamic contracts that just changing the words on websites and adding a URL into an agreement, it's questionable. They've gotten away with it so far. It's going to take somebody somewhere, maybe not necessarily an audit, but to challenge this, because I think the limits are getting seriously pushed. Oracle have been doing it for a very long time and have gotten away with it to a certain point. But for example, just about you have things like the PVU values, what constitutes a valid platform, our rules for what products we support anymore. You're being told, oh, you'll get an email that will tell you. I cannot see how that can be supported. The only thing I would say, though, is every time a person, or say an organization, renews their SNS, they are basically providing approval. They're saying, I agree to the most current set of agreements in place. So there's a degree of responsibility here too, that you need to be going back and checking, what am I signing up for? All those URLs that are in my agreements, what are the current what is the current state on them? And I think the most recent example was probably the Windows Server 2008, when it got dropped as a supported platform. That came as a surprise to a lot of companies, and suddenly what used to be covered by subcapacity was no longer covered. So that getting an email just to cover you for that I don't think is acceptable. But I'm not a lawyer.
No. It's an area that may go back to the legal challenge question earlier. That may well get tested in court in due course. And you mentioned previously ILMT and as a trigger potentially for your classic mistake not using it. But are there circumstances when you don't need to use ILMT?
Well, I suppose the most simple one is you don't want to take advantage of some capacity licensing. You're happy to pay the full whack for all processors that the product is installed on. And I should say active processors. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's, in other words, you might have 64 cores and you might have them sitting on one VM with two processors. You still pay for the 64. They're